Okay, welcome everyone to today's sermon on lucky breaks. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if I could just get some confirmation in the chat that it's working properly, that you can hear me, that you see the slides. Is it working? Or I see Sarah says she has a black screen. We're looking, oh, good. Yes, it's working for some other folks. Good, wonderful, thank you. Whew, okay. Deep breath, everyone. Wonderful. Let's get started. I've been really looking forward to some of the stories I'm going to be telling in today's session, so I'm glad I got it working again. Today's sermon starts back when I was still in college. This was in the late 1990s, and I went to college at the University of Evansville in southwestern Indiana. And at the time, I was getting a creative writing degree, and it was my hope to work in the book publishing industry. As you know, there aren't really a whole lot of book publishers in southwestern Indiana, or if you didn't know that, I'm telling you now. I did find one publisher. It was a publisher of military histories, and I did work for that company for off and on during my junior and senior years. So if there's any other book publishers in Indiana or in southwestern Indiana, I'm not aware of them. And so I knew that I needed to, if I wanted to work at a book publisher, I needed to start applying for internships. And this was between my junior and senior year. And one of my biggest criteria was that I had to pay, because I certainly didn't have any, I didn't have any inheritance. I wasn't married to a rich husband. My parents couldn't help me out. So I really needed to, if I was going to take an internship that wasn't in Evansville, Indiana, it needed to be paid so that I could, pay for the rent. So I went to the Barnes and Noble in town and looked at all of the books on the shelf that were about internships. And I remember this very specific book, The Internship Bible by the Princeton Review. And I found, I would say, about a dozen different internships that I applied to, places I had both heard of and not heard of. My only criteria was that they actually paid, and that was a small percentage of them, I'm sorry to say. So I sent off my applications, and I waited. And in the meantime, this was spring of my junior year. I had a really wonderful mentor in the creative writing program, Dr. William Bear. And we were working together. He was the advisor for the literary journal. And so I met with him every week about the literary journal. It was affiliated with the university. And we hatched this plan to do a little conference, a very small conference about undergraduate literary journals. And he decided that for our keynote speaker, he would try reaching out to someone he knew at Story Magazine, which is based in Cincinnati. And he thought there was a reasonable, chance that he might be able to get the editor to come and speak at our little conference, which was about 3 hours away from Cincinnati. Well, the editor didn't come, but she did send her managing editor, who at the time was Will Allison. And when he came and spoke, and he learned who I was, he put two and two together, and he says, well, you applied for an internship at my company, which was news to me because I hadn't applied for an internship at Story. What I didn't know was that Story was owned by a corporate publisher called F&W Publications, which was in Cincinnati. And so I did remember applying there, and I was like, oh, yes, okay, I did apply. And he's like, okay, well, now I've met you, and when I go back, I'll put in a good word for you with HR. And sure enough, within a couple weeks, I got a call from a very nice woman in HR who offered me an internship for the summer. I am pretty confident if that really lucky sequence of events did not happen, I would have not been offered that job. I didn't hear back from anywhere else that I applied. So if that hadn't come through, I really don't know what I would have done that summer. Maybe I would have gone back to working the McDonald's drive-through, which I had done between my sophomore and junior year, and delivering Papa John's pizza, which I also did that summer. So that is where my publishing career started, as far as, mainstream corporate publishing outside of the university walls. So F&W Publications is where I left. I had that internship over that summer. And then when I graduated from college, I had established a really good relationship with the person who oversaw my position, and he offered me a job once I graduated. So I spent another 12 years at that company. And it's really the foundation for most of what I've accomplished since then. So the other really unique thing and lucky break that unfolded was that the F&W Publications building, which was the old Coca-Cola bottling plant in Cincinnati, Ohio. And FYI, if you're interested in Art Deco buildings, it's a marvelous example of an Art Deco building. So the company was family owned, and the family had bought this old building and renovated it. And that's where all the offices were, and that's where I worked. And it happened to be across the street from Xavier University, which is a liberal arts university that has both undergrad and graduate programs. Now, something I didn't tell you is that I was really torn generally about taking a job in corporate publishing. I had actually originally wanted to go to graduate school, but there was the money issue. I knew that I would be going into a lot of debt to get that graduate degree, and there were some other factors that just played into that not happening. So I ended up working at F&W, but also feeling really regretful that I wasn't in grad school. But when I saw this university across the street offering a master's in English and a full tuition taken care of if you were a writing center director, I thought, well, maybe I could see if I can get into the program. And then if I do get into the program, maybe my boss at F&W will let me adjust my hours so that I can work here at F&W and get my graduate degree too. And I'm happy to say that it fell out exactly as I would have hoped. I was able to get the directorship to cover my tuition and adjust my hours at F&W while I earned the degree. Now, I won't say it wasn't incredibly stressful to try and do both things at once, but I was also very young, and everyone was very flexible and kind, realizing what I was trying to accomplish. So I was able to secure that degree within 2 years. And then once I was done getting that master's degree, I went back to F&W full time. I did have a reduced hourly week during my studies. So all I had to do was walk across the street and then walk back across during those 2 years. So that was certainly very lucky. And I was able to set the stage for something really important that was going to come later, because I always knew that I wanted to teach in some way. And so I knew that having that master's degree or having some sort of graduate degree was really kind of imperative if I was going to teach at the college level. So that brings me to the end of my time at F&W, which by this time was called F&W Media. So in 2010, I realized that I needed to leave the company for myriad reasons, but I didn't have a firm plan of what that might be, where I was going to go. I didn't really care if I stayed in Cincinnati, but I applied for jobs for a full year, and I just couldn't get anything. I couldn't even get an interview. Finally, this position opened up at the University of Cincinnati in the College Conservatory of Music in the E-Media department, which is a pretty unique department in that it's very much practical in that it's teaching students to have careers in the media, but it's within a liberal arts environment, and it's also within a music conservatory. So they were looking for a visiting professor at the time that the position came open. And I applied, and by an amazing stroke of luck, I got it. And I say by amazing stroke of luck, which is my background did not fit the professors who were teaching in this program. That's not to say I wasn't qualified, but it's just I was a slant fit rather than a perfect fit. I had not worked in broadcast media like radio or TV, which is the emphasis of the program. But I did work at a media company loosely, and I certainly had a lot of experience with storytelling and online writing, writing for the web, and I was active on social media. And so at this time, all of those things were becoming really important. And the staff and the professors there saw that, and they saw that I brought those skills. So right position at the right time, and there was no one else, I guess, who was competitive enough to take that position away from me. But it was only a visiting position. It was just for 1 year, and but luck struck again in that they got approved to make it a permanent tenure track position. So I was able to, after that first year, apply for the new permanent job, and they hired me for that permanent job. Of course, there was a lot of other things going on in the meantime. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with my background, I was working at Writer's Digest. I was working a lot of social media at the time for Writer's Digest. I was keeping a blog. So meanwhile, I was getting pretty active on Twitter. So Twitter started, I don't know, around 2007, maybe 2008. And I started really ramping up my activity around 2009, roughly. And as I got more active on Twitter, something very interesting happened. My following really started this crazy growth period, which you can see illustrated here. I'm glad I was prescient enough to take a screen capture of how the following increased in this very distinctive moment. And I think this was in 2000, going from 2009 to 2010. Yes, that's the exact period. So why did this happen? I've actually written an entire blog post on this trend line. The blog post is called How I Got a Six-Figure Twitter Following. And the big reason is that Twitter put me on its recommended list for the books category. So if you were new to Twitter and you were looking for recommended accounts to follow and you clicked books as your interest area, my account would pop up among some others. That's why I had this really crazy growth during this period. And then the growth leveled off when my account was taken off that recommendation list, or when they stopped the recommendation list. I'm not sure which it was. So my Twitter following is bigger than it ought to be for the level of recognition that I have in any community. This is strictly luck that this happened. I don't know why it happened. I don't know why anyone thought that I should be on that list. I was not in New York publishing. I was still in Cincinnati, but that's just how it worked out. Because of this, I ended up getting my account, along with some other people, got discussed in a Publishers Weekly piece, who's got pull in the publishing Twitterverse. And they made this little joke in the article that the Jane Friedman in Cincinnati has more pull on Twitter than the Jane Friedman in New York, who's the former CEO of HarperCollins. So I have a publishing doppelganger. Like, there's a Jane Friedman who's more well-known than I am. And so this article was kind of saying, Twitter makes it possible, for the rural folks, to be big on, to be big in publishing, which was very true. Social media has been really an essential part of my career growth and led to a lot of these lucky breaks that I'm going to be discussing basically from this point forward. When that piece came out, I would say it was maybe, I don't know, 3 months later that I got contacted by the chair of the literature department at the National Endowment for the Arts. So every couple years, or maybe it's every year, they do grants. It's every year. They do grants to publications and grants to writers. And when they do those grants, they don't just decide by themselves who gets them. They bring together a panel of people from all different walks of life who have some expertise in the publishing industry and who should be getting grants. The guy who was the chair knew about my Twitter following, didn't know me prior to that, saw the PW piece, read my site, saw that I liked bourbon, and figured I must be pretty okay to work with, and invited me to sit on that panel. So again, this weird uh, this weird combination of factors led to this very lucky break. And so I went to sit on that panel, and it was an amazing experience. I got invited back to do it again, but I think you can only sit on the panel twice. So then I didn't go back after that. Now, the guy who ran the NEA literature department ended up leaving shortly thereafter. He left within a year or two, and he ended up running a literary journal called VQR, the Virginia Quarterly Review, which is run out of the University of Virginia. He was rebuilding the staff, and this has a really long history, which I won't get into here, but essentially the staff needed to be rebuilt from scratch. So he reached out to me, remembering my work on that panel. He wanted someone who was savvy with social media. He really admired my Twitter following still. And so he recruited me to come out to Charlottesville, where I still am today, and help bring VQR, kind of into the social media era, into the digital publishing era. So, while I was there, I got the social media accounts back up and running after their dormancy. We got a new website launched, we got digital subscriptions launched. So I did good work there for 2 years, but to be honest, it was not a great fit. It was not one of the better decisions I've made in my career to leave my tenure track professorship and go work for this publication. But it worked out in the end, because without VQR, I'm not sure that I would have been given the chance to see what a full-time freelance life would be like. And I'm very happy with where I've ended up, but it did require this detour of sorts. Now, as I've moved along in my career over the years, I feel like luck has maybe played less and less of a role. At least that's how it feels internally to me. I feel like I have a lot more control over things that happen. And whereas early on, I needed people to take chances, or I needed certain events to happen in a certain way. But in my freelance life, there's definitely still so much serendipity that happens, ideas that come from places you just don't expect. And this is one of the key examples. Justin Kremen, who I knew from my Writer's Digest blog, I think he was a guest for that blog maybe in 2010. He remembered me, he remembered my work, and about 4 years later, he wrote me and said he wanted to refer a client to me for query letter help. And this wasn't really something I was doing. Like, I was doing some freelance on the side, but not that much. At the date that he sent this email, I was still working for the Virginia Quarterly, but I knew I was leaving too. So this email where he says, my clients have been asking me about submitting manuscripts and query letters, and it's not my expertise, and I don't want to do it. And I want to refer these jobs to someone else. And so, the subtext here is, do you want this work? Should I refer people to you? And it didn't really occur to me that I was a good fit for that work until he pointed it out. And so for those of you who remember, or I can't remember if this was during a Sunday sermon, or it might have been during a webinar I did on diversifying your income, where I said, sometimes how you should expand your freelance business, by what people seem to think you're good at, or the business that comes to you without you even asking for it. That's a really strong signal that you should pay attention to. So I was lucky that Justin thought of me for this, and it sparked this idea that I needed to formalize this as an offering at my site. I needed to, create some structure around query critiques, synopsis critiques. And I started also creating content around this. So instructions, blog posts for people who wanted to learn how to write a query or a synopsis or submit to agents and editors, so that I could create some lead generation for this part of my business. So all of that has this roots in this one exchange that I wasn't expecting. And so I'm very thankful to Justin, wherever he may be today, for creating this hidden, or bringing to light this hidden opportunity. And this particular client he referred to me ended up writing my first testimonial. It was by Rich Turgeon. I still remember, because he wrote me such a wonderful testimonial saying I was the Ferrari of editors So you can, if you go digging around on my website, you can still find it. Well, this has been a short sermon. Like, this is the last thing I wanted to mention as far as a lucky break. I only plan to go for about 30 minutes, and I'm about at the 30-minute mark. I don't know that there are necessarily any questions that might arise out of discussing this material, but I'm open to questions. So if I got my eye on the chat, but I need to open up the Q&A. I don't see any questions. So I'll just hang out here for a few minutes and see if any of you want me to expand on anything I've brought up. I've really focused for the last half hour on what I consider the business lucky breaks. I haven't really talked about the more personal lucky breaks that kind of also factored into this. The one that I often mention is the fact that I stayed at that first job at I stayed at that first company at F&W Publications. I stayed there for 12 years, mainly because I was married to someone who had to stay in Cincinnati for his own graduate degree program. So he was getting a PhD in computer science, and I was pretty much glued in place, even though I desperately wanted to leave Cincinnati. But that gave me some stability that I'm not sure that a whole lot of 20-year-olds have. So this was through my 20s when I was kind of career building at F&W. And I probably would have been out of there in 2 years flat, or left for some other graduate school to get a PhD after I got my master's. But I had to stay because I wasn't going to break up my marriage. The marriage ended up, disintegrating anyway, but not for any of those reasons. So that's also something that, just a set of circumstances that happened to work in my favor. Joel asks how I got into the speaking area, and that all arose from my work at Writer's Digest. So I'm going to stop the share here so that you're not staring at an email while I discuss this. So what happened with the speaking was Writer's Digest magazine often ran advertising that said, "Do you need a speaker for your conference? If so, let us know." And so the magazine got a lot of requests from all sorts of conferences around the country. And it was a really good deal, generally, I think, for the conferences, because Writer's Digest didn't charge for the appearances. They did expect travel to be covered, but beyond getting your flight or airfare or mileage reimbursed, hotel, etc., there wasn't any other out of pocket for the conference. So there weren't that many staffers who could accept those engagements. I would say there was a core of maybe 3 people who would take them on. And so the editor-in-chief at the time would kind of decide who she thought was the best fit for a particular opportunity. Of course, she always took the Hawaii ones for herself, as I would have if I were in her position. But that's how I started speaking. And it was a good way to start because, she would, if you were very new, she would give you the low pressure ones, the smaller ones, the ones where you could get kind of comfortably start honing your skills as a speaker. I was not a great speaker starting out, so that was helpful. And there wasn't a lot of pressure since you weren't getting paid, right? You weren't really keynoting. You're usually running a session on query letters or something that Writer's Digest would be known for. So that's how I got started. And then once, I was 10 years in and I had been doing conferences, several, if not 6 or 7 every year, by the time I felt like I wanted to charge, I had plenty of experience and knowledge to do so. I don't know that it would have been that easy for me to start a speaking career if it hadn't been for the Writer's Digest brand standing behind me. So I often don't have a lot of advice or insight to help writers with that, since I had that built-in publicity and marketing for me. Although later this summer in August, I'm going to be featuring in the paid classes I offer a writer named Benjamin Vogt, who has created a writing and speaking career totally from scratch based on publishing books and articles. And so I think he's going to have a lot of good information to share on how that happened for him. Let's see, looking back at the questions here. Diana says some of your lucky breaks came from networking. So how do you recommend expanding a writer's network? I would say, as you know, I'm a terrible networker. So to the extent that they came from networking, I would say they came from community. So, you know, my first lucky break was associated with my professor in my creative writing program. And that's one of the reasons people attend MFA programs or any university program is for that community and ultimately the built-in network that you get. So that's can be very important. Obviously, not everyone's going to attend a university program for writing or publishing. That's not a network everyone's going to have access to. So then the next step would be, well, what's the writing center or writing community in your town or in your region? You know, look at the bookstores or the libraries. They often run reading series or have writing groups. So those are some immediate places to look. The other thing is that, you know, I did a lot of what I would call very soft, passive networking using social media. So I got really big on Twitter mainly because I just kept putting out content that I thought would be helpful on Twitter. It wasn't that I was actively networking on Twitter. It's just that people found my information useful. They found me, and then conversations just organically happened from there. So one of the reasons I encourage people to be online and to use social is by being visible. You encourage those connections, you encourage that networking without feeling like you're going out specifically to network. You know, just by sharing your ideas, your content, talking about what you've read, books, articles, that generates conversations, and that's kind of that's the heart of what was happening on Twitter and why it was so helpful for me. Um, Certainly the Twitter of today is not the Twitter of 2010, but fundamentally it still works in the same way. So I would definitely look at social media as one vector for those sorts of serendipitous relationships. You know, I met two of my business partners originally online. Porter Anderson, who I partnered with on Hotsheet, and then Manjula Martin, who I partnered with on a publication called Scratch. Those were both relationships that started online. With Porter, it was Twitter specifically, and then we solidified those relationships in person. So yeah, it's a lot of it's just putting yourself out there and thinking about what can you discuss, what can you share that's going to attract like people into your orbit. Jessica says or asks, do you have a speaker's agent or a literary agent? I have neither, and part of that's by choice. I did look at one point for a speaker's agent, but the honest truth is I don't command high enough speaking fees for it to be worth an agent's time. And the same is pretty much true on the book side as well. You know, I was paid $5,000 for my book advance. I already know how to negotiate a contract, so I didn't really need an agent for that deal. That's not to say that you shouldn't have an agent. I'm in a very unique position. For a speaking agent, though, I think that comes when you're already probably getting offers that are maybe minimum 5,000 for speaking. I mean, I'm guessing, but you know, a speaker's agent earns money by taking a percentage of what you earn. So you have to be earning something meaningful in order for you to secure one. Diana asks if my Writer's Digest work was part of what I did at F&W. And yes, that Writer's Digest was one of the many properties that F&W owned. And I worked at, even though I was primarily associated with Writer's Digest, I worked with a range of brands at F&W. So I worked for Northlight Books. I worked with How Books. I worked with Better Way Books. And then we even started an imprint called Toe Books at F&W. So I was, and then I got involved in, excuse me, in Digital Book World, which was also started at F&W. So it was a multifaceted company. I say was because it unfortunately had to file bankruptcy last year, and so it's no longer in existence, and all of its pieces have been sold off. So while Writer's Digest still exists and some of these other properties still exist, the corporate parent is gone. And just to clarify the years specifically that I worked for Writer's Digest, I started there in 2001, and then I left as an employee in 2010. But ever since then, I have continued on as a contributing editor, and I teach for them as well. Adana says that I mentioned one of my breaks came from someone who saw before I did that I'd be good in a particular position. So in retrospect, how would you recognize a good fit on the horizon? Not sure I have a good answer to that. Um, Certainly there are things that I've learned only after making a lot of mistakes. I've learned about things to avoid. I realized that starting partnerships, like publication partnerships, I mentioned I had two business partners. It's in the past. They are not active business partnerships. And I put all the blame on myself. I'm just a miserable business partner. I work really well independently. When I joined VQR and that independent streak came out really strongly, I realized that I had reached a point in my career where I was probably just not all that well suited for work for a traditional employee-employer relationship anymore. I just had so much happening on the sides. Well, at that point, it was on the sides, whether that was speaking or blogging or social media, it was overshadowing what I was doing for my employer. So there are certainly signs that arise. My name and my side gigs were becoming too big um, to make my employers feel comfortable. And it even was starting to be a little bit of an issue when I was in a professor position, believe it or not. The chair wanted me to dial down the speaking, which seemed crazy to me, but I think people just get jealous that you're spending time on things that maybe aren't what they consider important, and so I always bristle at that. So I look for those tensions, the places where you always seem to come into conflict with people. That's, I guess, looking at the negative side of the question you asked, Donna, but that's what comes to mind. Mark says, it sounds like you've written fiction, maybe poetry. I did write both in college. I continued writing poetry while I was in grad school, but I more or less stopped the fiction and poetry writing once I got into my publishing career, partly because I lost interest. I don't think I was ever really driven in that way. But the initial publications that I had in those areas were definitely from relationships I'd established in college. So it wasn't that hard to get the publication credits initially because I had those college-based networking opportunities and relationships. Later on, getting published wasn't so hard because of all of the activity that I was doing online. So when your name comes up every day in front of someone's face, like whether that's on Twitter or Facebook or on the blog and people are talking about you, it's not that hard to get opportunities to land in your lap. And that was the case for the University of Chicago press book that I did, The Business of Being a Writer. The editor reached out to me, and she knew who I was because I'd already contributed to a couple anthologies that the press had published. And she just felt like, obviously, I probably had a book in me, and would I write it for them? And I was flattered to be asked, and I was happy to write a book. And that's probably one of my weaknesses throughout my career, is that I sit back and just wait for things to fall in my lap rather than proactively pursue things that maybe might be best for my career. So I would not encourage this sort of passive approach. But it's worked for me because it's always been, I'm going to put out as much as I can, and I'm going to see what comes back to me. I'm going to see what hits, and then I'll take next steps from there. As far as what lucky breaks you could draw from getting published from that, it's just mainly about not sealing off all of your work in a place where people can't see it. It just makes it hard for people to come to understand who you are and what you're writing about. If you want more education on the benefits of that, I highly recommend Austin Kleon's Show Your Work, which I tend to mention a lot. I probably have already mentioned it in a sermon at some point. But I think he better than anyone I've seen shows the philosophy behind being part of a community, being part of a scene, getting your work out there, and how it can help fuel your career. All right, I'm taking a look at the chat to see if I missed anything. Marilyn asks if I'm going to be offering a paid course on how to do a Zoom presentation like I've done today. Marilyn, you might want to take a look at the recordings that I have available of these sermons, because I did one on online events, and I also did one on online teaching. And so you might find exactly what you need from those free sermons, which you can find listed at my site, and you can also find on Facebook. So I don't plan to do a paid presentation because I feel like whatever's in those sessions would probably be enough. And you're welcome to email me if you like. All right, so let's see. I wanted to mention what's coming up next. Where did that slide presentation go? Give me just a moment. I do have another Sunday sermon on the schedule. I just need to get my ducks back in a row here. There we go. So the next Sunday sermon, I'm going to skip the holiday weekend. And on July 12th, I'm going to get back into more practical nuts and bolts sort of territory. I'm going to be talking about what you should look for before you sign a contract. And I'm mainly going to focus on traditional publishing contracts. So this would be from book publishers, magazine publishers, websites, those sorts of things. So, looking at rights clauses, reversion clauses, royalty clauses. I'm not so much going to be talking about hybrid publishing contracts or publishing service contracts, but if the questions take us in that direction, I can certainly address those issues as well. So if you'd like to sign up for that July 12th sermon, you can just go to my site at the Sunday Business Sermon homepage and register for free. And then I mentioned Benjamin Vogt's upcoming class about how he became a paid writer and speaker, which I'm really looking forward to, because I think he's done, if you look at his career, I just think it's far more remarkable than mine, and how much sweat and blood and tears he put into getting where he is today. So you can find that at the online classes page. So thank you all for joining me once again. I really enjoy these sessions, and I hope that you do as well. And I hope to see you in a couple weeks. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye, everyone.